Just as quickly as colleges and universities attempt to reopen, they are swiftly switching to online learning due to coronavirus outbreaks. Some of the biggest clusters have been linked to Greek parties and off-campus parties, which have caused widespread infection. Just this week, Notre Dame shifted to remote instruction after 147 people tested positive for the virus, while Michigan State told undergrads they would not be coming back to campus, at least for the fall semester. Now, the key to returning to normal college life could be rapid testing for COVID-19. Yale University's saliva-based test, SalivaDirect, has been granted emergency authorization by the FDA. Let's bring in Christoph Thaiss, Assistant Professor of Microbiology at the University of Pennsylvania. Christoph, welcome to the show. Let's start with the saliva test. Why is this such a game changer, especially for colleges and universities?
Right, so as you point out, it's really a uniquely challenging situation at the moment in the current state of the pandemic, because on the one hand we have still very high infection rates. We have a lot of virus around in many states and in many cities. And at the same time, we're moving towards reopening schools, reopening colleges to some extent. So the question is really, how can we deal with these situations, especially where physical distancing or mask wearing might not be possible at all times in a classroom setting and so on. So the answer is really to enhance our ability for contact tracing in very early detection of outbreaks. And by
Sure. Please continue.
So to get there, what we need is very rapid testing. And there's a lot of innovation in this area, both here at the University of Pennsylvania and in other places around the world, where we can basically take each component of the test and we can try to optimize it. So the first one that you mentioned is, how do we collect the material, right? And the standard collection method is the nasopharyngeal swab, which is a little bit uncomfortable for the patient, but it's also very difficult to self-administer, because you need medically trained personnel to collect it. So the saliva test really offers an opportunity here to really expand the scheme, because we can ask people to self-collect saliva, both in the hospital setting as well as at home. And the tests have shown that sensitivity of this test might be on par with the nasopharyngeal swab. So in the long run, we can focus a lot more on saliva.
I'm glad you mentioned this, because you're saying with the saliva test, most people can do it individually. So is that why it's so much quicker than the multi-day wait that so many of us have been experiencing when we take our COVID-19 tests?
Right. On the one hand, it's much easier to collect it yourself, right? You don't need the uncomfortable nasopharyngeal swab. But on the other hand, this new test, the SalivaDirect test, it also works without purifying the nucleic acid of the virus from the specimen. So the amplification reaction can be performed directly on saliva. And this is another reason why we can save a lot of time using this strategy. But there are also many other ways by which we can accelerate the process. So some of the things we're trying here at the University of Pennsylvania are pool testing. So we're not testing each sample one by one, but actually many at the same time. We can couple this to other methods of amplifying the viral genome. The classical test is using qPCR, but there are other ways that are being developed. And we can couple it to next generation sequencing, which is basically letting us not only detect if the virus is there or not, but we can basically look at the viral genome letter by letter. And all these strategies can be used to massively scale up testing capabilities.
Christoph, I have to say the technology seems incredible. What's so interesting is the NBA apparently was used kind of as a guinea pig for this kind of testing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the NBA was actually, from a scientific perspective, it was very useful to have a test case like this. And I'll tell you why, because whenever there is a new test like the saliva test being brought to the market, we need to show that it's as good or even better than the standard test. So to do this, basically what had to be done in this case is to have a large population of people and to be able to compare nasopharyngeal swabs and saliva tests from the exact same individual to confirm that the tests are equally good. So in the case of NBA players, it was possible to repeatedly obtain nasopharyngeal swabs and saliva samples from the same person at the same time. And this was very helpful in establishing this test.
That is so fascinating. So these NBA players would take both tests, the saliva test and the regular COVID-19 test. So to that point, how accurate is the saliva testing comparatively? And should we be worried about maybe those false positives or just a lack of detection altogether, Christoph?
Right, so false positives and a lack of detection is always an issue when we're talking about diagnostic tests. The early results from the saliva test have actually shown that it's performing equally well, if not slightly better in some cases compared to the classical test. So we're not too worried about deficiencies of this test or comparability to the results obtained by a nasopharyngeal swab, right, by the classic COVID test. And of course, as we talked about, there are many advantages of using saliva, including the ease of collection and the abilities to self-collect.
To that point, how quick can we get the saliva test to the markets?
So the saliva test is using pretty standard lab equipment, so there is no technology concern in rolling this out across the entire country. I have to say that in every case when a new test is being developed and being established, there is a certain validation period that is needed to make sure that at each individual location it's working well. But in terms of infrastructure and lab equipment that is needed, the test is relatively straightforward to administer. So there is a hope that we can get to large-scale testing using saliva relatively quickly.
So very quickly, we know the NBA bubble has it, which I'm just blown away that that's how the testing was done is incredible. We know USC already has this rapid testing plan in place. You mentioned that even for the saliva test, the same laboratories are being used. But when can we see it maybe more widely used, even if it's across colleges and universities or sports teams?
Right, so here at the University of Pennsylvania, we've already started ramping up saliva-based testing. So this is already in development and in application. I don't know how long this will take to roll out across the entire country, because of course there is differences in different states and the viral situation there, and as well as the laboratory equipment in different places. But I see this happening relatively soon, in a matter of the coming weeks and months, definitely to help us now into this extremely challenging period when the fall is coming, when people are experiencing flu symptoms that are not related to COVID or the common cold, and it will be much harder to rely only on testing symptomatic people, because then we might be missing asymptomatic spread of COVID-19. So for all these situations, it's going to be extremely useful to have large-scale population surveillance testing available.
We certainly appreciate your expertise. Again, this is so fascinating. Christoph Thaiss, Assistant Professor at the University of Pennsylvania. We really appreciate your insights, sir. Thank you.